Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Brett and Scott, for being with me this morning. Um, so, something that I've been thinking about, not just for the past few weeks, although the past few weeks have made it come to my mind a lot more frequently, is this idea of feedback. And a running thesis I have when it comes to this idea of feedback is that life and the world is just the continuous loop of adjusting to feedback. And because it seems to me to be just so pertinent to life and how we live every moment, um, I thought it was a worthy enough topic for discussion. The general uh, parts of feedback that I would love to talk about today is just sort of what feedback, when I say the idea of feedback, what does that look like for you? Like, what do you immediately think of? What do you consider to be good feedback versus bad feedback? And then, sort of, how can we properly receive feedback? Um, and if we don't know what the word of the day is, it is indeed feedback. So, yeah, I'll just prompt those questions to you guys, to you and to Brett and Scott this morning, and see what comes to mind. Any thoughts?
Why don't you start, Scott? Because I figure I'd like to get as much insight out of you before you end up having to jump off.
So for me, I didn't start using the word feedback until about 5 years ago. No, 7 years ago. So the idea of feedback was really wrapped up in the concept of criticism and determining whether it was
Mm.
constructive or destructive. Um, I did use it. We have a term called feedback in the biological sense around things like breastfeeding. So
Mm.
that's what's considered a positive feedback loop. So in order to keep the breast producing milk, it has to be used. So and this is one reason why pumping is a thing in that, is to keep that positive act moving so that the thing will keep going. Most of the systems, I want to say there's only one other positive feedback loop in the Bible, or in the body, rather. All the other feedback loops are negative feedback loops. So our bodies release chemicals that stop processes. Um, Maybe the clotting cascade is one. That's another positive feedback loop. So one process begets another, begets another, begets another, and there's I believe 12 factors or cascades that take place to construct a clot at a cut. Um, Now, in terms of the personal, I could do like a macro view and a micro view. So, in terms of the macro, like the big picture, societal picture, I think this is why people like Al has a thing with the words we use. Because I think in
Mm.
some ways the bastardizing of the language prevents proper feedback. I think another thing is this idea that if you have one sin, we have to cast you out into the desert, right? So that we don't get the whole picture. That's a kind of breakdown in communication. At a personal level, like maybe feelings have something to do with it. Like the feedback we get triggers some sort of emotional response, and then that's the way we can go forward by using those as a guidepost, not being led by them, but saying, oh, there's something wrong here. Um, let's go there. And then the last thing I would say is that proper relationships in love can provide the most pertinent feedback in our lives.
That was awesome, Scott. Thank you.
So the first thing I thought about was walkie talkies, you know, and you know, you're kind of like, I'm getting a little feedback, you know, because it's not coming through clear, it's staticky or whatever. And so like, yeah, I think that originally when I thought of feedback, it was always a negative thing. But thinking about it, it makes sense how that word has kind of changed into certain other things as far as how it's evolved. And it seems to me that yes, it is a bad thing to listen to feedback. However, that feedback is giving you something important so that you can change the channel and get a clearer signal. So that was the first thing that I thought about. And so then I went to the psychological aspect of it, because ultimately there is some sort of psychology behind, you know, giving feedback. You know, it doesn't have to be the clinical sense of psychology, but it's like something that's going on in my head that if I'm receiving information, depending on how I'm receiving it, is going to be it's going to be well received or it's not going to be received well. So I thought about, as an example, anxiety, and I thought about the feedback loops. So, for instance, and I guess a negative one would be anxiety would lead to me avoiding, and it would give me temporary relief. And then I thought, well, what would be a good positive example for anxiety? And it would be anxiety causing more worry, leading to higher anxiety. So it's like what Scott was saying about positive loops and negative loops. Like there's you know, depending on the circumstance, right? A positive feedback loop versus a negative feedback loop can be a bad thing or a good thing, just kind of like the walkie-talkie. Um, so I guess me using anxiety, they're kind of both negative. I mean, to a degree. I mean, it's, you know, I would say it's not something enjoyable to say. I'm anxious all the time, or I have anxiety. You know, like that's not like something that we would say is the ideal state of mind that we would prefer to be in. You know, so um, and also I guess getting feedback from sources that I'm not expecting the feedback from. So I'll pick an adversary. So like, and this isn't necessarily fair to him, but just kind of how it works out is like my brother. You know, we're close. He's the younger brother. We've disagreed a lot throughout our lives. Um, and when he would give me feedback, it seemed like the only stuff that I actually heard was the negative feedback, you know. And my instant reaction, probably because we're siblings, would be defense mode, you know, or justification, or you just don't understand how I think. So therefore, you have to understand it from the whole perspective and why I'm doing this or whatever. Um, so, and then there's, you know, the one that is more enjoyable, you know, like somebody that really likes you and maybe even never sees a flaw in you, you know, and they give you feedback and you're like, maybe because you really appreciate them liking you, you know, so you're like, ooh, they're giving me feedback, like I really want to work on that, you know, like I don't want to not be liked, you know what I mean? So I kind of was thinking about that. But then with my brother as an example, because I went into defense mode, I'm not using that bad feedback to change the channel. Or what if I change the channel? Could I see it clearer? Um, and like, yeah. So I guess that's the first things that came to my mind.
Sweet. Thank you guys. Um, so a couple of the things that I feel like I was writing down, they all sort of seem to have a theme of connectiveness or connection or relation, and how it seems like feedback is something that's in relation to like a system, and then the feedback you get is like how your part or a part relates to the system. Does that seem to track for you all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think this is why I kind of want to ask the next question of like, how does a connection like in reinforce like feedback for you? Yeah, he's a little loud. I'm gonna
We're
mute
getting
you, Scott,
we're
for a
getting
second.
we're getting feedback. We're getting some
We're
feedback.
getting feedback. um, but I actually, and I want to say, Brett, I love that the analogy of the walkie-talkie or the reception type of stuff, because that's how it shows up most for me when I know that there's like some sort of lack of connection, right? And so like when we are not on the same frequencies and we're trying to give that feedback, the feedback we get is noise, right? It's distortion. It's what is it called? Static, or and there's not an actual message that comes through. And so I just kind of wanted to see if we could talk a little bit about how this like connection like encourages like a deeper or more meaningful or better, quote unquote, better feedback, and if that like resonates with you guys at all.
Yeah, I like how the walkie-talkie, because as a kid, you had all like the 5 channels that you could click through, and and it's like if you were close enough in frequency, you might be able to hear a little bit, but it was a little gargly or whatever, and then you had to get on the right channel. But I was thinking about those 5 different types of people for channels, and I was thinking that was it funny because if you're a 5 and I'm a 1, I'm not even going to hear it, right? At
Mm,
all. But if
right.
maybe, you know what I mean? So like the farther of a gap we are, it's going to be even harder to hear anything valuable, right? So yeah, I like the idea of looking at it that way, because also not everybody's going to be a 5 or not everybody's going to be a 1. So kind of realizing and recognizing that and the limitations.
So then in that sense, when it comes to like, oh, okay, we're on different wavelengths, we're on different frequencies, how then would you best like bridge that gap? Like what's then or how do you realize that you're on the saying the wrong things, or you're in a different like level, and then once you realize you're on a different level or on a different frequency, how do you adjust so that you can be speaking on the same frequency? Or do you have an idea on that at all?
I don't think necessarily we have to adjust.
Mm,
Not
why
always.
not?
Well, I think that if I'm in a different channel, I think there's value to making the change, making the channel change, right? Because you're going to hear it clearer. So like if you're capable of going from a 5 to a 4, that may be doable. But I think for some people to go from a 5 to a 1, it may not even be in their framework, their ability. So it's like it's just going to be an impossible task, and it's just not going to work, but if someone else comes along and they're a 2, that person who's a 1, they may be able to track, they may be able to get closer, they may be able to tune in a little bit closer. So I feel like I don't necessarily, I mean, if you have the capacity, maybe, to go from and I guess if we're using these channel terms for analogies, let's say, for the argument's sake, one is like super deep, like
Okay.
somebody, Afriel made me think of this because when he was on your panel, because he's a very deep thinker, and he's very like, so you really
Yeah.
have to kind of tune in as best you can. But some people are just not going to be able to tune into that way that he articulates himself, so it's just not going to work. But then you have people that are very, I think, more like me, like just normal words as much as I can, but I try to communicate effectively, and I try to be, maybe I'm more up in the middle, but like I try to be able to kind of speak wherever the level is, but it doesn't always work out. That's maybe how I see myself, and more than anything. What do you think, Scott? Or sorry, Megan.
Yeah. Do you have an opinion, Scott?
He's in the gas station or something.
Nice. So the thing that kind of came to mind for me is like, I think we oftentimes get under the assumption that we're supposed to receive feedback in like A, B, or C terms, like that it's supposed to come to us, or like we're supposed to hear it in our own, I don't know, like the things that we can already understand. And I think what I'm trying to get at with this discussion of feedback is that it comes to you and you can receive it in a multitude of different ways. And I think it's, when you're talking to someone like Af, who like might be speaking on like literally using words that like that you could spell, that you can see in your mind, and he's making sentences that are coherent and make sense, you would think that, oh, then I'm going to be able to receive this feedback from him, or I can give feedback to him, and we're going to be on the same page. There's like this interesting assumption that because we're speaking the same language, that we are on the same frequency or speaking that energetic type of like language. And that's not always the case. And so I just think it's interesting how we seem to, I don't know the mechanism, but it's almost like we pigeonhole ourselves into being ready for or looking for the specific feedback that we know to be real or true or right, when there's so many different like stations that we can go to receive different types of feedback. And so my like curiosity is how to get people to take a trip to, frequency number 2 instead of always being on, frequency number 1 or whatever. And like how to do that, because there is so much more information that we are passing, but that we seem to be missing. I don't know if that resonates with you guys at all.
It does a little bit. I mean, if we continue to play with the analogy, like, you got to find a way to transcend. You got to get to the level of the individual that can turn the knob on the walkie-talkie, right? You can't just be stuck in that channel mode. And I would say the way that you do that is in relationship with the creator of the walkie-talkie. And then he teaches you how to see the different perspectives through patience, kindness, long suffering, all the things.
So then would you say that like if you're trying to give feedback, whose responsibility is it to transcend? Does that make sense? Like whose responsibility is it to meet the feedback like conditions so that you are speaking on the same frequency? Like, is it the person who's giving the feedback, oh, I need to find where they are in their stations? Or is it the listener who's supposed to adjust to what's being given? Does that make sense?
Kind of. What I was thinking about was the arena agent in
Okay.
that thing. Like, because I brought it to biology. Like, the system was created, right, to have a response to the positive feedback loop if we're talking about something like breastfeeding. So it's both the responsibility of the thing outside of the body happening and then the body rightly responding, right? It gets the feedback and then it has to do the thing. The chemical messengers get sent, and then those hit a receptor, and then that receptor has to release its chemical to then cause the gland to make the thing, and the gland then has to make the thing. Where we see is usually dysfunction within those systems, like there's not enough chemical, there's not enough whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
everything has to kind of be in its right order, its right place, the right amount. And you could make the claim that it's a responsibility of the system, but you could also make the claim that the individual components within there have to respond and do their air quote job.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Now bringing it back up to say us, I think we have to be like in a place to be able to accept it. If we're constantly, if we're too rigid, right, and not able to accept things from the stranger, right, we won't grow either. So that's kind of where
So
I'm at with all that.
what is that? So like, what does that look like then? Like to be ready to accept? Like, what does that look like or feel like, or how does one do that?
Prayer. I mean, in my personal life, that's where it's at. It's in the prayer. It's in the relationship of, like, what am I not seeing? Show me what I'm missing. A heart that's soft, something like that, like a willingness to suffer, a willingness to go through the fire and burn off the thing that's not working.
Yeah, because I feel like whenever I
Maybe.
think of like participation with like feedback, I always feel like, and I know this is like a personal thing, I always feel like I have to do something. But this is the same thing, just like in life. I feel like I'm always having to like do something. But I think when it comes to receiving, like it's like then like you're not supposed to be really doing anything to receive. Like you're supposed to be like, does that make sense? Like you're supposed to do almost like do less, like in order to be able to receive it.
What about listening, though?
What
Right?
about listening?
Well, I think that's part of the receiving. Is and there's degrees to listening. I would say in our day and age, it's probably the hardest thing to do. People don't listen these days. They just wait for the opportunity to speak again. And that's like a hardening. And it doesn't allow
Yeah.
you to receive the feedback, which is the first thing, right? First, it's got to get in, but then it's got to get applied. And that turns to action, like in those feedback loops that we were talking about. It's kind of both and.
Mm.
Yeah, because I mean, I have over the years become way more receptive to feedback. In the most effective teams, that is This is the whole saying that communication is the secret to any good relationship. That points to the feedback. Right? Somebody's got to be able to tell me I'm doing something wrong. I got to be willing to accept that and then course correct as it relates to the goal of whatever the function is. If it's, getting to know my brother and sister better, whether it's, something more in terms of a job, like the goal is to get the clothes from the back door to the front door, in terms of, I feel like I've been talking a lot.
No, this is
Sorry.
good. Did you have something, Brett?
Yeah, I was thinking about this idea that being willing to change and things like that. I think that, as an example, since just because it's easy for you to use this metaphor, it seems, if you're on a 1 and I'm on a 2 and you're saying, come join me, right? I think that if I can hear you coming through, but there's still feedback, right? There's feedback, but it's not clear. And you're saying, hey, change to channel 1. And I'm like, okay, I'll do that. I click to channel 1 and I hear your voice and I'm like, okay, I recognize this voice. So now you're communicating with me through that channel, and I'm starting to able to hear it and receive it. But what if I don't recognize the voice? So it's a strange voice, right? So I've got this strange voice on the other end of this radio giving me information. And so I'm obviously going to weigh it differently than I'm going to weigh the familiar voice, right? Because the familiar voice, I've already had a relationship with them. I've already communicated with them on multiple fronts, So like that information is going to be way more accessible and relatable because they know me, I know them. So the puzzle piece fits when the feedback is given. Whereas if it's somebody I don't know, or I do know and I don't trust, it's going to come through a filter of like, okay, this person usually gives me bad information, but is there something hidden in it that I could glean? Like they may be telling me, listen, man, I actually see you and a train is coming, you're like, oh, like, okay, maybe I'd take that a little more seriously, right? But if they're always radioing me and saying the train is coming, eventually I'm like, okay, this person's, because the train's never coming, and it's like, this is ridiculous. I'm just getting the same crap. So like I've read, so I guess the thing I'm trying to point to is that I think that there's, I like Scott's metaphor, or like the create, bringing it to the creator. It was making me think of like the inventor of the radio, right? The guy that created it, and he wrote a manual, like how to use the damn thing. And so obviously I can go to the manual and I can probably glean what he's talking about. But then there's also people that just aren't good at reading manuals. Like they're really bad. Like they'll read it, they'll try to see if they can grok it, but sometimes talking straight to the inventor, right, kind of gives you that more personal, a little more intimate. Not that you can't get it from reading the manual, but it seems almost more personal. This is why it's hard for the analogy where it kind of breaks down, because ultimately I feel like he talks to me even in his scriptures, right? If we're using the metaphor in this regard, like like I'll read something and I'm like, oh, and it's like he pointed me right to the place that I was gonna get it, like, and it wasn't roulette, you know what I mean? Like I knew I had to go through the table of contents, get to the section whereabouts we're talking about this thing, and then try to parse it out from there. And then boom, he shows it to me. In prayer, it's a little bit of a different thing because it's like the direct, the more like, it's more like not bound by this manual. There's more going on, which is more like him using my own mind to communicate with me. And like, like me and Scott were talking about praying, and then all of a sudden, randomly, somebody pops up into my head when I was like, Lord, I really show me somebody that I can, talk to about this, like I'd like to be able to do this, and I just, and you're kind of going through the prayer and you're talking about something else, thinking about something else. And then all of a sudden, boom, someone pops up into your head, you know, and you hadn't thought about that person in like 10 years, so like so random, but not random, you know? So like, yeah. So I kind of think about stuff like that.
Do you feel like that's how you get like spiritual feedback? Do you think that like just popping randomly in your head is like a
It has, yeah,
spiritual feedback?
yeah, yeah, because
So what do you
it's you.
do to receive that? Like what is like yeah, you were just saying like, oh, I don't, like it's not
I think,
random.
yeah, it's like I can't. I'm trying to give a specific example because it's so hard. Like it's kind of like when somebody says, "Show me a miracle in your life," and I'm like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah, come on,
I'm like,
Brett.
I got a lot of
I
them.
got a
I mean,
million.
I mean, I've got a lot of examples where he intervened in ways I couldn't comprehend, and so if you don't want to call it a miracle, fine by me. But there was clearly a result that happened that
Sure.
wasn't even on my radar. So like I'm praying for something specific, and I'm thinking there's only A and B outcome, and he gives me a Z outcome that wasn't even on my radar. You know what I mean? So, so like that, like when you're talking about prayer, there's been a lot of times where I'm praying, and sometimes I won't even be praying it. This kind of reminds me of the Holy Spirit doing for me what I can't do for myself. It's like I'm praying about something completely isolated, completely different, and then all of a sudden, hey, so and so has been thinking about you, like, or or it's been a while since you interacted with so and so. It's like, where did that come from? Like, that's not, that person isn't even on my radar, nor do I think about them at all. But then randomly in the middle of the time that I'm praying is when this person comes up in my psyche. It's like, yeah, that's weird. But so then I'll like kind of probe it. I'm like, well, what do you want me to see with that? It's like, and I'm not, and this isn't like prophet stuff. It's just maybe people think that that's what that is. I don't know. Maybe that's where the disconnect is when it comes to that stuff. But I feel like um, it is interesting, and sometimes I need a couple of signals. You know, Sometimes it might pop up in my head in a prayer, and then lo and behold, the dude calls me, like, again, out of the blue. Like the dude randomly pops up into my head, and then randomly he calls me. So it's kind of like almost like the Holy Spirit just jamming the person in my path, regardless of whether or not. So it's like, yeah. So I guess that's what I mean by that.
What came to mind was Plato's Cave. And
Mm.
so they're getting feedback, right? But they're misinterpreting the feedback. And I heard somebody say something about how do you foster the people that are in the cave the idea to believe that there's another level, right? Can you, while you're in the cave, find the mechanism to even believe
Hmm.
that the reality that's being put in front of you isn't all there is? And I don't know. Like and I think this is where, some of the traditions say that it's not of me, right? Because how can
Hmm.
how can you find a way out of the cave when that's all you know is
Right.
being in the cave? And
No,
that kind of maps to the channels a little bit too.
mhm.
Like you have to be open to the idea that there's more than just the channel. Like that there is actually a device that has multiple channels that you can gain access to.
Right. And that's sort of what I was trying to point to towards the beginning of the fact that I think we're being given all of this information constantly. Like we're getting this feedback constantly. We just don't, and I like the way you said it, like we don't believe that we can't get information outside of the things outside of the cave, outside of the ways in which we're already seeing the feedback. It's like, oh, I'm seeing it. This must be the only way. We can't creatively imagine or believe that there might be another way in which this information is being given to us. And that's where I think this feedback really ties into this idea of faith and belief too, because you have to be able to, like you said before, you have to be able to transcend, or else you're not getting all the necessary information, like or properly so. Again, that's still like a working
Mm-hmm.
theory for me, but like, because I think you're still getting it. It's just you don't know you're getting it. Like you can't actually participate and
Yeah.
interact with it. And I think if being in relationship with these ideas or this feedback, like if that's the way you can actually produce fruit, then you have to be almost like aware of it. You have to be, I don't know, or in belief with it. Like you don't necessarily have to know it, but you have to be in connection to it or open to a connection to it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the where it gets sort of muddy for me, because it's like, I can say like this is better and this is not better all day long, or like this is how it ought to be, but I don't know. But I think there's something about that connection, there's something about that belief, there's something about not being stuck in this is the only way, that seems to be the only way to live a good life or a fruitful life or a healthy life.
Well, I'm thinking about Plato's cave, and that there's multiple people in the cave, and one
Mm,
person gets out, right? And no matter how right the guy is that comes back to get his brothers, like you're you're never going to beat them in. What came to mind is you got to bring back an apple and share it with them and say, "Look, here's something different." Right? You got to bring a piece of that outside world into the world softly and gently. Like, you know what I mean? Shaking them to and no matter how right you are, shaking them and yelling and screaming at them or hitting them or none of that's going to get them to believe. You got to bring some fruit from the outside of the cave, is what I thought, to
I think
even
it's
open the door to the belief.
I almost feel
mm-hmm.
like it's yeah, I feel like it's like almost like it's purposeful that Plato didn't have that as an option, because that seems to be the logical option. Before you go back in the cave, maybe go pluck an apple and go back and show them, look, this isn't a shadow. Look here, it's a real thing. So like it's a little bit of a different dynamic if that was a potential option in the story, right? But it seems like he's pointing to this almost like a group of Thomases, like they're just incapable of seeing what you're telling them, until obviously they see like your analogy of this actually seeing the fruit. And the greatest part about the Jesus story part, is Thomas is like, Jesus is like, no, man, I'm going to let you do what I didn't do to the disciples. Put your hand in my side. Put your hand in my hands, like feel the scars, because that's what it was going to take for him, right? So like Jesus has a different capability, I think, than sometimes we do. And this is the reason why when I'm talking to somebody about Christianity as an example, since I mean this is just the framework we're in right now, is that um, it's it because I know it's not my job to change your heart. I can give you information, I can give you facts, I can give you data, I can point to biblical history, and prove why the Bible has the most credibility from an evidential standpoint. But all that stuff isn't going to matter unless the Holy Spirit does a work in your heart to be able to receive it. The idea that this person's going to just be so open-minded enough to finally receive it, it's just
Mm,
not in my human wheelhouse. It's not. I'm not that guy. You know what I mean? So I feel
yeah.
like knowing my limitations also plays a big part in the communication. I can only say what I can. If somebody can understand it, fine. But if they can't, then there's only so far I can go. I can't put it in more words or different words than the way that I am.
Okay.
Go
All
ahead.
right. So this is kind of cool. So what if you didn't necessarily use words? So sticking with
Hmm.
the
Yes.
allegory of the what if sticking with the allegory of the cave, you kept visiting outside the cave, and let's say you like ended up getting a job outside of the cave, and so now you were gone outside of the cave from the hours of 9 to 5 every day, but you came back and you stayed in relationship with those people, and just in the way you are being is transformed, and those people then get to see a transformation within yourself without even, you know what I mean, like trying to convince them. You're just living with them and they see the change within you, like, because of your interaction with the world outside of the cave.
I,
And then that
you know,
becomes a good feedback loop for them.
I think that's why, I keep seeing it in the chat, but it's also something that I feel like I've talked a lot about. It's like, I think that's why hypocrisy is so detrimental, is because like, if you're like talking about it and not living it type of idea, then like this sort of distortion of feedback happens. Like you're basically saying
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, if words don't work, maybe my actions will. And I think it's actually like somewhat of what T was saying. I think it's sort of a combination of both. Like, yeah, you can speak this all you want, but like without that sort of like embodied change too, it's like what's the like meaning behind it? And so I think, yeah, like having that sort of like meaning behind it feels so much more real. Like it's the only way. And so like I guess what I was going to ask you guys is then how do you properly do that? I feel like you were saying, Brett, like, oh, I've kind of done all I can word wise, and then Scott went to the next of like, okay, then I'm going to like sort of like embody it. What if someone after that isn't getting the message,
Yeah,
isn't
right.
hearing it? What do you do next? Like, do you just leave? Do you like cut off? Do you prune that branch? Like, is that like, like what then? If the branch is dead and it's not getting any sort of feedback, audit, like fall off. Like, where's the line there? That's the next step for
Yeah,
me, where I'm trying to like
yeah.
assume like who am I to say that that's a bad branch? But if it's not getting the feedback, that feels anti life. If life for me is the continuous adjustment to feedback and you can't get the feedback,
Right.
then
It's
what's there?
funny. I feel like that if you have a gift of resilience, if you've been gifted with a level of patience that is beyond other people's ability, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing that they don't have that gift, because they may have other gifts. For instance, communication. They may be a great communicator, but for whatever the reason, or someone may be a great displayer, like really good at embodying, like, the idea behind the communication that you're trying to do verbally. But then there's other people that are good at continuously showing up and doing that thing, kind of like Chad's poem, Stand by the Door. Like there's just
Mm,
people that are gifted and called to do those type of things, and not everybody is. And I don't feel like it's right necessarily to judge the person that isn't able to
Mm-hmm.
articulate it well, or isn't able to embody it perfectly. It doesn't mean they're not trying. They're just not living up to the bar the world says a Christian should be, per se, is what, the critique always is on for Christians. Oh, you're not living up to your own standard. It's like, no kidding.
mm,
That's the reason why it's an amazing standard to have, like even I can't live up to it, and so So it's kind of like, so I think that it's okay to say, oh, he can't communicate and she can't demonstrate it, but maybe there is someone else that will be able to push through and continue to fight for that. But I think it's okay for me to not judge her for not being able to communicate it, or even me judging myself for not being able to manifest it. You know, it's
Mm.
okay. You know, there's going to be somebody that will be able to do that. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, right? I'm not trying to give us an escape route to, well, if we can't communicate, you're free to take off. I'm not saying that we shouldn't make attempts to have these types of, try these gifts or try these abilities, try these fruits, because God does use things in us randomly that we don't even see in ourselves sometimes, right? So like it
Mm.
would be foolish to just have this like closed, nope, that's not my gift, and just walk away.
I,
No,
I
that's not right.
I think the thing that strikes, I don't think that you're wrong. I think it's just there's like a weird part of me that feels triggered by that because it's almost like, and maybe it's just because I'm so good at excuses that like that feels for me like, oh, that's just the way that they communicate. Oh, that's just the way they communicate. For me, automatically, I'm like, oh, that's an excuse to like ignore parts of them or
Yeah.
not call them to responsibility or like not value excellence in new types of not introduce them to like there's so many different ways that my brain goes when I say like, oh, that's just what they were given. It's like, okay, but like, is that okay? For me, it doesn't feel okay, and I don't know like what that energy is that I feel, but I think it's like it feels like a way, because excuses for me feels like a way that evil gets in. Excuses allows for that crack in the system, allows for something that's not pure to just weasel its way in, and then it taints the whole environment. For
Yeah,
me,
I guess
that's the
I guess
dramatic part of it for me.
I guess what I'm talking about is like this superior communication, better than anybody else, or this
Mm,
superior embodiment, better than anybody else, like Mother Teresa, right? Something that's just like crazy, that is like, no matter how kind you are, or how much you do still do the thing, it's not like you're throwing it completely out. You're trying to actively participate in the idea of communicating, or even be better, trying to practice being better, or even practice embodying and living the thing. So it's like, I'm not I you know, I definitely agree. You should be actively participating in trying to build some of those strengths, which we're calling gifts, which is probably bad. The gifts idea is like it's something that is literally been
mm,
specialized for you, like, and it's not. That's what I was saying at the end. It's not an excuse. It's not. There's,
mm,
just, oh well, I'm not gifted, and you walk away. I agree. I don't think that that's the right way. Uh, and I do think, but there are times where people recognize themselves, like, especially if somebody is in a place like, well, since we'll make it more real, if someone is in a place in their life where they're constantly um, raging, right? That particular person has work to do, right? Like they still have to get to a place, but for whatever the reason, God has them where they are, and they're still seeking God, but they're just ragers, right? For whatever the
mm,
reason. And so it's not like that person isn't actively participating or trying, but there may be a point where they just are never going to get to any kind of level of really doing it the right way, so their life just kind of is going to be like this, but they're at least aware. They're at least trying to go back and make amends for the rage. They're trying to do things to correct it, but it's just like this impulse, whether it's, like some people's brain are wired, right, to be, have
yeah.
Tourette's, right? There's nothing that person with Tourette's is going to be capable of doing, right? Uh, to help that. It's just the way it happens, So, but if he's aware of the Tourette's, even in the beginning of a conversation, they say, just FYI, say crazy things. This is, this is the diagnosis I have. And then they say, you stupid asshole, you know, and you're like, okay,
Hi,
who told
Scott.
me?
Thank you.
Sorry, Scott. Anyway, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I guess like, you know, I feel like you can always come up with like certain specifics as to like ways you can't control certain parts of like giving or receiving feedback. That's why I think there's so many different dimensions of how you get and receive feedback like in life. And then I also think that like it's really very much contextual too, like what you're trying to do, like what room you're in. I feel like uh, almost like represents like what type of feedback is like relevant, whatnot. Like the thing I wrote, trying to go to the actual uh, title of like what's the value of good feedback. I said good feedback, and I think in the beginning Claire said something that was like good feedback is like compliments, and I want to push back on that. And then also in a second, Claire, I will let you in, but I will only be going for 10 minutes once I let you in, so keep that in mind. But I think that when it comes to like good feedback, I don't think it's compliments necessarily, but I think it's relevant. So like, is it relevant? And so then therefore you have to be like connected to the environment. You have to be connected to what's actually happening in the room. I think it has to be timely. Like, I think it has to be like connected to the behavior or the thing or the actual happening. And then all of that has to be within a specific connection. So there has to be a like some sort of either, I'm a human, I'm an organism, I'm a player in the system, it has to be, again, sort of linking to that relevancy. It has to be within a connection. And so I think, like you were saying, like there could be things that sort of hinder that sort of like feedback being given, but I think it really depends on the context more than anything. Does that sort of relate to what you were saying? I might have taken it a little bit tangential on that, but
Yeah, we can definitely get, I think, tunnel visioned, especially on identifiers or definitions. I think it's like that was a great example. It's like I only see a good feedback as a compliment. Well, and I would disagree, Claire. I mean, I would think that
that's how you treat it.
No, I
well, you delete and block, and you've got everyone to delete and block, and Scott has blocked me.
I didn't get anybody to delete or block you. I didn't contribute
Scott
to that at all.
I'm sure
he's a grown-ass man.
Not really, but
you're just trying to nanny him and try to make people feel bad and get against each other.
But Megan, I to okay, well, just keep summoning the army and talking over me. Have an honest conversation or not. I only have minutes, and you're going to let Brett talk over me. Got.
Sorry, there was a little bit of an echo.
Imagine
I couldn't hear.
All of them off so we can have a talk, because otherwise Brett is just going to... are you prepared to do that or not?
Are you talking to me about having a...
They'll be interrupting, won't they? You know Brett, you know Teo. So why can't we have a dialogue for a change without your guardsman protecting you?
Do you think I need protecting, Claire?
Well, I think you guys want to be safe. That's why you can't have a one-to-one. Scott was able to have a one-to-one, and after doing this,
Claire, I've talked to you on your channel multiple times, and I'm happy to have a conversation with you.
The third time.
Oh, Claire, shut the fuck up, woman.
Shut Claire, respectfully, like it's not productive. At some point, it's like not productive, and I'm happy to continue to have conversations with you. But when it
environment where it's possible, right, with your guardsmen and
nobody likes me.
I'll talk to you on the phone if you want. Why does it have to be in front of people where there's like eyes to see it? Do you need someone to prove that someone wants to be? I've been wanting to be a friend to you. You've called me a potential friend, so we're obviously not at that level. But I would love to be able to have a real connection with you, but I feel like there's always that resistance, that distortion in the way. So feedback, like I've been talking about, the relevant part of this conversation never comes through to you. And I would love to be able to be in connection with you where it is relevant that when we speak back and forth, it matters to one another, but it doesn't seem to matter what I say to you and vice versa. And that's unfortunate. And that's what I'm talking about, when it's like at some point, if the feedback is never given or received properly, then like, what are we doing here? We can't even talk about the ideas. So I'm happy to do
What
those things.
ideas are you finding difficult? I presume that your idea of friendship is, well, whoever shares your values, that you like, that isn't challenging. And what would be the point of me fitting in with people who adopt this sort of culture so they never discuss anything properly?
So you're saying you believe that
So
I am
you're
only
fitting
friends with
into
people
the
who agree with me?
yeah, that's what you're doing.
Has
changed.
anyone agreed? Like, what are people agreeing
They
to?
wouldn't
Am I
dare agree
asking? I
with
don't know what
you.
people I'm asking people to agree with for me.
They're the
I'm not
seven,
talking about any
they're the seven
specifics.
dwarfs, and you're Snow White. They're not going to disagree with you. You're
She has a
special.
point there. She has a point there. Female privilege and all. But Claire,
That's fair. Yeah.
you are absolutely boring. I came on just to troll you. I've got nothing productive to add. I knew once you came on, the convo was gonna devolve into trollism, so that's why I came on board. Well done, Megan. You actually made
Yes,
it, made
and of
Claire
course
relevant.
Megan
Hold on,
allows
hold
it
on, hold on,
because
hold
she
on,
goes,
hold on, hold on. Keep
you've said
quiet
it
for a
before.
second.
You're boring too.
He's like talking, like he's like trying to help you, I think, Claire, like for a second.
Well,
This
he said
this
it
is
before.
this
We're
is
in contact on Discord, so anything he wants to say to me, he can already say to me
and
through a different
you've been
channel.
you've got everyone's email, so you could also, instead of waiting backstage for 50 minutes, have sent an email to say what you wanted to say. But you want to go viral, and you're a virus chasing virality, and any sort of appearance on anyone's live stream feeds you your chance of going
I
viral
just want to
with
ask
your
a
stupid
question.
ideas.
I just want to
What's
ask
your
a
question?
question.
Ask one
What's your
question.
question? You haven't asked a
Yes,
single question.
the question is the nature and purpose of religion.
But unfortunately, that's not relevant to the conversation we're having. I'm happy to answer these questions, but when we're in a
Are you
room, this is what
prepared
I was
to
talking about.
discuss
If we're
it?
in a room, and
Okay,
well,
we can
that
talk. We can talk about the subject, like the value of good feedback. Obviously, constructive criticism is the best possible kind of feedback, right? You don't want fake compliments. You don't want abuse and insults. You want constructive criticism. So we can say that in a sentence or even a tweet.
Has
But
You know
anyone
what,
then
ever
Claire?
we
given
deal with
you
the
a
problem of
constructive
people who can't
criticism
take
that
it.
you received? What's an
Yeah, there
example
we
of
go.
someone giving you a constructive criticism and you
Thank you
you
for that.
receiving it?
Thank you for that, Teo. So I remember what Scott said. He said something about the mountain of relationships or whatnot, and then I have to participate in a way that is found conducive to the values and culture of TLC, which is never to say what you really mean and never say anything that any person might find offensive, and which means never to define your terms. And that was what Megan said the other day, that in the TLC we better not be asking each other to define terms in case it
that's
offends people.
Go on, Brett.
Claire, let me.
that's
I want to ask you a question because this is a good example. You came on to the 7 hour stream. Scott brought you on, and you asked your question, and you gave your insight. And as soon as there was feedback and discussion, you literally muted. We talked for maybe 5-10 minutes. They hit it, volleyed it back to you, and you were nowhere to be found. And
Yes,
I
I
understand in
was
the
called. I had to step away.
I understand, but my point is that you really won't, you're not okay with receiving the information, or even when you do receive it, you're not even willing to process it and of the potentiality. And I would argue that some of the best feedback I've gotten has been from people that I don't agree with. Why? Because it usually hits me to the core. When I put my head on the pillow at night, I think about it because it resonates with me more and it impacts me more. This is the reason why calling somebody names is more memorable than giving them a compliment. So that your premise and the way that you're framing this is that's not accurate.
I don't know what you're
What was the
referring
question,
to
Brett?
now.
Well,
But
if
I'm
you're going to
talking
be a
about
two-way
Scott.
conversation,
No, I think I'm talking about the okay, so there was this silent bit when I went to have some lunch and then I came back, and then after that I was kicked off by Scott after saying that men are primarily motivated by sex, and he was so offended he kicked me off,
no, that's not why.
which I
Because
thought was pretty pathetic.
because you weren't there for the conversation at all. You jumped in. You had your moment.
I gave
You had
the
to get called.
reason.
You had to get called away.
Yeah,
Then
I'm
maybe
sure
you
if one
shouldn't have
of you
jumped
called
out at
in,
all.
it wouldn't have been commented on. And then when I
Maybe,
tried to make my point, that Al, who always uses every opportunity to give a mini lecture on some unrelated thing,
All
but
right.
that's fine. As long as he's one of you, right? As long as he's,
All right, I'm just going to take a second because this is my stream and I feel like I don't want bickering happening on this stream. That's just not productive. It doesn't really make sense to what we're trying to do here. I understand that there are tensions that are happening, and I'm just going to alleviate that by saying let's all go to Chris Howard. I appreciate you guys coming on here. But the feedback I'm going to be giving to people is that if you're going to come on the stream, at least for me, I just want to stay on topic. Otherwise, you're not going to be allowed into the room. Unfortunately, that means that we're probably not going to be talking about the really high-end stuff that Claire maybe wants to talk about. But I appreciate you at least indulging me today on my ideas of feedback. I hope to continue to talk about this stuff because I really do feel that it's incredibly important. And so on that note, if you would like to give me any feedback on how these sorts of things are run, I'm very open to it. Still very new to this space and trying to figure out what it means to be in good community and spread good information as well as vibes. And sometimes we miss the mark and we have to own up to it. So today might not have been the best day, but I appreciate, where we're going. So everyone, let's head on over to Chris Howard, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day. Thanks, everybody.